Compared to when I was a lad, collecting toys these days is a totally different game. Now, aside from the obvious peg warmers, why are you modern collectors so racist and sexist? Most modern toys have an extremely short shelf life, and that's assuming they even make it to the shelves in the first place thanks to the ingenious idea of the online pre-sale. So in this video, I'm going to show you a wonderful time in history when toy companies actually cared and made sure that the children could get the toys they saw advertised on TV. Can you imagine a desirable toy being readily available some 5 years after its release? Fortunately, I can. So in this video, we're going to take a look at some of the toys that were made in the 70s but still enjoyed well into the 80s. Stay tuned. Welcome back and welcome to a wonderful time in history. So let's get right into this and start with what I consider to be one of the greatest toys ever made. The Evel Knievel stunt cycle was first released by Ideal Toys back in 1973, and unlike many toys, this one did exactly what it claimed it could. This toy was so much fun to play with, and just looking at it on display brings back so many fond memories. Now, as I said, this first hit the market in 1973, but I didn't get mine until my birthday in 1982. Yes, I was late to the party here, but the fact is, the stunt cycle was still being advertised for sale in early 1984, as can be seen in the spring edition of the 1984 Argos catalogue. It disappeared shortly thereafter, but an 11-year run is nothing short of remarkable. Another amazing toy line from the 1970s was Kenner's $6 Million Man. This line officially ran from 1975 until 1978, but given that I received my Maskatron and Steve Austin for Christmas in 1981, the line was still available in shops some 6 years after its initial release. And I know this to be true because unless my parents had access to a time machine, how else could they have bought them, as online retail was still decades away? The fact that these were still popular 3 years after production ended is testament to what a wonderful toy line this was. Sticking with 1/6 scale dolls, and yes, I did say dolls, if the pants come off, it's a doll. But here we have Action Man from Palitoy. The classic Action Man line ran from 1966 to 1984, and the Action Man dolls I played with all originated in the 1970s. One of my favourites was the Talking Commander, and as mine had eagle eyes and gripping hands, it was first released in 1978. Now, I'm not entirely sure when I got mine, but if a gun was placed to my head, I would say 1980 or maybe 1981. Either way, it was purchased 2 or 3 years after its initial release. From looking through some old Argos catalogues, I see that it was still being offered in the spring 1984 edition. That of course coincided with the end of the classic Action Man line, as Palitoy were now focusing on the 3 3/4 inch Action Force line. Action Man had a hell of a run spanning 18 glorious years, and once again I find myself saying they don't make them like they used to. Britain's Detail Soldiers line focusing on World War II ran from 1971 until 1989 and remained largely unchanged for its duration. Despite having had 1 or 2 of these soldiers in the early 80s, it wasn't until 1984 that I actively collected them. Even as a 10-year-old boy, I was well aware that they were from the prior decade, as the boxes they were presented in carried a distinct 1970s feel, which was in sharp contrast to the glitz and glam of the mid-80s. Britons knew they had a quality product to offer, so never felt the need to update their marketing, and why would they? As kids, all we cared about were the toys, and the packaging invariably ended up in the garbage anyway. The fact that kids in the 80s were quite happy to hand over their pocket money for something that was at that point older than them shows just how highly Britain's soldiers were revered, especially when we were being programmed to want the latest, greatest, shiny item. Corgi had been making die-cast vehicles since 1956, and by the mid-60s had started producing vehicles based on popular TV shows and movies such as James Bond and Batman. When Met Toys' Husky die-cast car line was rebranded as Corgi Juniors in 1970, the floodgates opened in terms of making cool, recognisable cars to children with pocket money to spend. 1978 saw the introduction of affordable toy cars based on popular TV shows and superheroes. These little die-cast cars remained incredibly popular until the demise of Corgi in 1983. Now, I was buying these toy cars until about 1982, and as with Britain's soldiers, I was well aware that these toys were from the prior decade. But not only were the toys themselves excellent, there was something quite special about the 1970s style packaging. I could go on about how Star Wars figures that first came out in 1978 were still on pegs in 1985, or how some space Lego sets were still available some 6 years after their initial release, but I think I've made my point. So, what changed between then and now? Well, corporate greed for one. I mean, why only push one product on a willing consumer when you can make them buy 10? And you will note that I use the term consumer and not collector because that's exactly what you are. We've all seen the social media posts of people complaining about the paint applications on the latest figures, whether that be Star Wars or Marvel, and yet these same people still buy them. If the toy companies are seeing that people are still buying their subpar products, of course they're going to make more and more and more. Back in the 70s, the toy companies knew they had a sound product and stood by them. They didn't treat their customers like fools. The fact that some of the toys I featured in this video are in some cases now over 50 years old speaks volumes about their quality. For the most part, modern toys are just mass-produced junk, which will do well to remain intact for the next decade. The irony here is that despite these modern toys being aimed at adult collectors, they are essentially still just cheaply made toys aimed at children. Don't believe me? It's right there on the label. The sad thing is, today's modern toy consumer has become a slave to the brand, which is quite ironic when you consider that the people in the Far East who make these toys are little more than modern day slaves themselves. I really don't want to dwell on this too much, but there's enough information out there highlighting the appalling conditions these factory workers endure, so feel free to do your own research. I'd much rather focus on the positive and celebrate these wonderful vintage toys, just remembering the memories that were created from playing with them, and also think back to a time when toy companies really did care.